Hello everybody. This week I'm going to be making a quick video just about one specific design pattern that I feel like doesn't really get examined or talked about very much, and so I just kind of wanted to put my thoughts on it out there just so that people can either become aware of it or maybe just have something that's a little bit more concrete to kind of build off of. And so what I'm going to be talking about today are what I call forever games. What I mean by this is that it's a game that is designed to be played as much as you want, and it's meant to scale and change with all the new content that's added. So there's two different kinds of extra content that gets added onto games later. There is add-in content, which means that it's something that is incorporated into the rest of the content. And then there's add-on content, which is something that is kind of appended to the end. It's sort of just like an additional area, an additional level. Maybe it's still using the same mechanics as before, maybe it's adding new stuff, but it's not recontextualizing the previous experience, it's not recontextualizing the base game with the added content. So there's add-in and there's add-on, and forever games are something that is add-in. So it scales and changes with all the new content that you add. With modding and frequent gameplay patches being a thing that exists in the game industry now, you may be thinking that any game can kind of be added on to infinitely, and while this is literally true, that companies could keep putting more and more content in there, I'm speaking more about games that are made to have new additions recontextualize that old gameplay. To get a better idea of what I'm talking about, the main games that I'm using to analyze this design pattern are Slay the Spire, Minecraft, Dwarf Fortress, Slime Rancher, and Dungeons & Dragons. So this is a lot of games to kind of be looking at, but I think that most likely someone is going to be familiar with at least one of these and they'll kind of get where I'm coming from, and I'll start to talk about an example for each one in a moment. So the common element that these games have that make them able to be played forever is that they are systemic, so they're based on multiple different systems, and the interaction between those systems is what the core mechanic is, so they're a systemic game. They are modular, so they have these little pieces and components that kind of make up the full breadth of the game. They have player expression as a core mechanic. They usually have something sort of similar to what would normally be considered a game development discipline, so something like similar to programming or something like similar to designing like an area. That's usually like a core mechanic of the game, or even just the choices you make. These games typically have many choices that the player has to make. These games try to nullify correct answers, so they have what is called comparable choices. So it's two different choices that are similar but not the same, and they each accomplish this like one goal in two different ways, and each have different elements to them. So like one might have a certain drawback and a certain positive, and the other would have a different positive and a different drawback. They have resources, so you have to manage resources in these games, some kind, even if it's just health and then food meters. Like that's a resource that you have to manage, and that means that they have something that they can balance the way the rest of the game works. So if they change something about the way food works, then you as a player have some sort of resource you manage, such as your hunger, that would mean that you're having a moment-to-moment experience that kind of scales with time, and therefore can have these emergent moments that kind of pop up as you go through experiencing the game and dealing with these systems. And finally, they are often community-focused, so they focus on giving the tools to the community, so at the very least they can communicate, they can theory craft, they can discuss these systems, they can make new content, they can like reskin it, they can do all of these different things that sort of build into the analysis of the game. So it's sort of everybody versus this sort of modular growing system, this modular growing game that can be sort of played forever and at the very least have interest in the community for a very long time, as long as things are being developed and new things are being discovered in the game. Each of these elements contribute to making a new piece of content interact with as many other existing elements of the game as possible. So I'm going to go through a few examples of these games that I mentioned before, and like how a change of these games kind of recontextualizes the whole game experience. So if in Minecraft you made a new block type, then it would make what you wanted to find. So if you're looking for coal or diamond or something in the earth, it's going to make that more or less tedious. So you can have blocks that maybe break quicker, and that's going to make the digging experience less tedious, or you can have blocks that just don't have any particular use other than aesthetic, and that will make whatever the goal is harder. Adding a new block to Minecraft is also going to make decorating more varied. So it doesn't matter if it's a useless block, it doesn't matter if it slows down some other goal you might have. Minecraft is a game about making things and expressing yourself and kind of building these pseudo-expressive, pseudo-mechanically driven things in the environment, and so there's going to be a little bit of give and take no matter what you add to that game. For Dungeons & Dragons, if you added a new subclass to a class, that would mean that there are more class combinations that are viable. So if you have a group of people and maybe they all want to be rogues, if you add a subclass to the rogue base class in D&D that has some kind of healing attribute or some way that it can heal better than the normal rogue, or maybe even as good as dedicated healing classes in certain circumstances, then a small party of 2 to 3 will no longer have to compromise on healing or stealing. New cards being added to Slay the Spire means that every single character can have a new experience. So dailies of the game will be shaken up. So dailies kind of have these modifiers that will recontextualize the game in and of themselves. And then if you add new cards to that, it means that there's more possibility space for each of these daily experiences. So like sometimes, even in events in the game, you can get cards from other classes. So if you add one card for one character, that changes the permutations for every other class and every other way that you can play the game just because that one card gets added. And if you add something like an additional character, it even opens it up even further, not just because in some cases other classes can share cards with one another, but just in general, playing the exact same content with a different character completely changes the play experience to the point where they're not even remotely similar. Dwarf Fortress can add a new behavior or adjust some kind of rate of change that is naturally built into the game mechanics. So like if food consumption per dwarf is increased, or the amount of food consumption necessary to keep a dwarf alive is increased, then that would have a massive effect on the game's difficulty. It would change how you start the game because you need to prioritize food more. You need to prioritize having recurring sources of food. Like just that one little element of a new behavior or some kind of adjustment to the rate of change completely morphs the way that the game plays. And it makes it to where it's basically a new game with all of the same trappings of the previous game, recontextualizing those systems. In Slime Rancher, adding a new slime will rebalance the entire economy of the game. It will change the way that you make your ranches, the way that what slimes you try to prioritize, how you interbreed them and mix them, like the new combinations for management and cultivating of those slimes. Just by adding that one type, it has a exponential effect on the kind of combinations you can have because of all of the existing content and the existing mechanics of the game. What makes these games last forever is not just that they can often be played forever, but they are also games that a developer could work on forever without any real necessary or natural stopping point. There can always be one more element added to the game if the enjoyment is derived from systems. There can always be one more new area. There can always be harder choices. There can always be more a player can do to differentiate themselves from another player. These games have systems that are high emergence and high engagement with players because it's very apparent to players when a game is asking you to figure something out versus telling you to follow the instructions. These games have many knobs to turn and many elements to each object to mix and match. These experiences are rewarding for both developers and players, with ample opportunity for collaboration between the developers and the community that plays the game. These two groups can kind of feed off each other, and together they make something that grows forever. Each of these elements listed above are things that developers keep in mind when making these games, and they're interesting to examine and see how players play the game because it's often rare to have any kind of predictable model of playstyle for these kind of games. Again, these core elements of this kind of design is that it's a systemic game, so it derives its core interactivity from the systems of the game. It's modular, so there are these pieces that you can add more of and remove in order to make the same experience change. They have player expression as a core mechanic. There are many choices, and they try to nullify the correct answer for those choices in order to have more variety in how people play. They have resources so that when they change things in the game, you have something that you are managing that interacts with. So there's something personal to the player that they need to manage versus the kind of external systems of the game. And they're community focused. So these games almost always have some element that allows you to communicate about what your game experience has been. There's some kind of element of community that drives these games. So let me know what you think. Maybe call out some other games that you feel fit this pattern, or even add to like what this idea of a game that can be played and developed forever. Let me know what you guys think about that, and I will see you in the next video.